All right, top of the hour. So let's get started. Welcome everyone to this roundtable at the ISPNPA XChange. The roundtable is on using technology to support research dissemination and communication. Um, my name is Stephen Barrett, and I'm hosting this roundtable. Share my screen. Everyone can see that. Um, and I'm here with Dr. Michael Wheeler and Dr. Matthew Tepe McLaughlin. So the three of us will be talking through this topic this morning, and then having in spirit of roundtable, we'll have plenty of time for chatting at the end and hopefully having some audience participation. So, a bit about myself. I'm an allied health research and knowledge translation lead in a hospital here in Australia. Interestingly, 50% of my role is in generation and 50% in knowledge translation. So trying to really emphasize the importance of translating research into practice. I'd like to say my workload is split 50-50, but there's a lot more in generation than translation. But maybe after today's session, there'll be a boost in people wanting to do translation. So we'll see about that. I'm also an adjunct research fellow at La Trobe, and I'm a member of the ISPNPA network of early career researchers. So, what are we going to do today? So we've got about an hour or so for the session. So I'll talk you to a little bit of, in essence, what we want to do in the roundtable. If some people who might be here not really aware of how they work, give you a quick overview of the speakers. Guess who you're here to listen to, not just me, and they'll give you a bit more detail in their own chat themselves. And a quick overview around the topic of using technology to support research dissemination and communication. So again, background to that before Tepe and Michael give you a bit more specific context into that. So a roundtable is a quite interesting way, and when I was kindly asked to moderate a roundtable on using technology to support research dissemination and communication, I did what any tech savvy person would do is I asked ChatGPT what it would be. And so ChatGPT told me it was something to do with King Arthur, but I had to dive a bit deeper to find out what it exactly was. So anyway, roundtable really, the benefit is, facilitates discussion, debate, consensus if it has to be. So it gives, rather than, one speaker giving everything, we want to facilitate open, equal participation among speakers. We'd like the audience to participate, so asking questions that we can hopefully generate some good discussions. Michael and Tepe will speak for about 10 minutes each, and then at the end we'll have, again, that open forum around all questions and topics that were raised around using technology to support research dissemination and communication. So for the audience, during presentation times, please put some questions in the chat, and we can try and I'll moderate those and see if we can get them into discussion at the end. So our speakers, we have Michael Wheeler. So Michael's an academic with a research focus on understanding how physical activity and sedentary behavior affect cardiovascular and metabolic function. Michael's also a lecturer in science communication at the University of Melbourne, and he hosts a podcast on science communication. So he's sort of a strong advocate for the benefit of science communication. And Matthew Tepe McLaughlin is a physical activity researcher and a public health advocate. Tepe, very confident presenter, always actively engaging with journalists, strong in the dissemination of research and advocacy side of it. So we'll have some I think we'll hear some very interesting points from our two speakers across the breadth of things around science communication. So why are we doing this? Why is it important to disseminate and communicate research? So we're all probably in the academic world aware of the knowledge to action gap. And that knowledge to action gap it's a concept that highlights the challenge of translating research findings and evidence into practical, actionable steps or real-world applications. And so the knowledge to action gap, it can represent like a disconnect between what is known in research and what is actually implemented in practice and policy and everyday life. And we know that from estimates, it can take up to 17 years for some of medical research to be implemented. So there's a big chunk of time before things that are done in research settings actually hit the ground. And so we're really trying to look at what steps can be done to bridge that knowledge to action gap, and with a focus today specifically on how technology can hopefully help bridge some of that gap. So what are some key components in the knowledge to action gap? Well, awareness is one. So, in some cases, practitioners, policymakers, they may not actually be aware of relevant research findings, and that can create a gap between knowledge and practice. Complexity is another one. So sometimes research findings can be complex, and they don't always align directly to the unique needs of specific settings or populations. So therefore, we've got to consider, adapting research to local contexts, and that poses a challenge that researchers need to consider in a knowledge to action framework. Communication gaps. So sometimes researchers may not effectively communicate their research in a way that is accessible and easily understood by practitioners and policymakers. So again, there's a skill in communicating research. Motivation, incentives, in some cases, there may actually be a disincentive for practitioners and policymakers to change current practice based on new research, especially if this new research challenges established norms or interests. So again, there can be motivation stuff, which is sometimes can lean heavily into the advocacy point of view. And finally, timeliness. So, the time it takes for research findings to make their way from design, publication to implementation can be lengthy. And so, people's perspectives of the world may have changed over that time, and that can render the actual research less relevant. So that timeliness action, and if something takes 17 years from research to action, then the research can be old by the time it's getting into place. Okay, so interested. So there's a number of things. It's not just getting access out there. In some ways, there are so many papers published these days that sifting through it all can be complicated. So it's hard to actually keep up to date with everything that's coming out. So it's not really all about a lack of publication. There are a number of things that affect the knowledge to action gap. So if people are happy to use the chat function, I'm going to ask a couple of questions about how many publications are put out every year for a couple of common topics. So please put your thing in the chat. If you guess the answer right, you can get a free subscription to Michael's podcast. Okay. Can you use ChatGPT? For sure. Better log in quickly. Okay, so how many publications per year are published for low back pain?
Rick, you cannot use ChatGPT. That's a very specific number.
Sarah, 5,000. And I guess I must admit the article I found this is 2022, so it might be a little bit off. A few guesses there seem to be on the pretty high side. What about for a sleeve gastrectomy? How many publications might be published every year in this topic? 10,000, 2,000. Michael, if you win a subscription to your own podcast, that's not really going to work, is it?
No, but maybe I can have another prize.
Okay, and we'll keep moving in the spirit of time. What about everyone's favorite research topic, bunions? How many publications a year in bunions? 1,500, Tebi. Could be. Or 50. All right. Thanks everyone for joining in. Well, now we know the chat function is working. Make sure you keep your questions for Michael and Tepi coming in the chat while they're working their way through. So publications per year, low back pain, nearly 1,000 each year for in low back pain. About 1,200 for sleeve gastrectomies. And for everyone's favorite research topic, bunions. No offense to bunion researchers. 202. So there are there's a lot of research coming out, published all the time. So keeping up to date with research is hard by itself. So it's not a lack of research that's the issue. That fosters the knowledge to action gap. It's all those steps towards translating and getting it into action. So I'll go over just a couple of complex concepts before I finish that Matthew and Michael will touch on today, and that might be relevant for people to consider when it comes to research communication. So research dissemination. So research dissemination, in this we're talking about the process of sharing and communicating research findings and outcomes to a wide audience. And in research dissemination, we often talk about sharing with researchers, policymakers, professionals in our field, as well as the general public and stakeholders. So that's research dissemination. Closely related to research communication, but distinction where research communication has a broader focus. So not only sharing research outcomes, but really also actively engaging in dialogue and collaboration with different stakeholders. So research dissemination, not specifically just putting it out there, but it has a bit more of that direct transference, whereas communication tries to be a bit more of a two-way thing and trying to really engage other people in talking about it. Knowledge translation. So knowledge translation is the process of translating research findings and knowledge generated in academic and scientific settings into practical and actionable information that can be applied into real world contexts. So taking the empirical evidence, putting it into a package that can be transferred into practice. And so, knowledge translation is really about, like we showed earlier, bridging that gap between research and the practical implication. Advocacy, so sometimes not pushed enough, but very important part of getting research into action. And advocacy is it's the act of publicly supporting or promoting a particular cause, a particular policy, or a particular point of view. And the goal is of influencing decision makers, raising awareness and affecting change. And those decision makers can be high level, government base, to sort of policy makers at the more local level. So really taking the relevant research findings and advocating for why they're important in specific contexts. And finally, research impact. So research impact talks about the demonstrable and tangible effects that research has on various aspects of society. And that can include policies, practice, industries, individuals. So in terms of research impact, we have our own impacts of H indexes and things like that. But, for the broad research impact, we really want to try and measure the extent to which research contributes to positive changes and improvements in the real world. So how does the things we do really impact the people who need it the most? So finally, why? Why is this important? So people used to say publish or perish. That was the academic line. We see a bit more around the term of be visible or vanish. So it's sometimes not just enough to publish your research out there and assume it'll be taken up. We really need to try and be visible, to sell our research, to highlight its importance, and try and get it into action. And new digital innovations can help facilitate knowledge translation. And we need to sort of think about embracing these moving forward. And our next speakers will really sell the importance of that and give us some practical applications for that. So thanks for listening. I'll give you the background, and without further ado, I'll pass you over to Michael next, is it, or Tepi?
Either or, yeah, happy to go.
You go, Michael.
All righty.
Thank you over to Michael.
Much, Stephen. Thank you very much. So thanks for inviting me along to this session. I'm going to try and keep this brief. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to lob out ideas to you that I'd love us to discuss at the end. I'll share some of my brief thoughts on some of these ideas, but really they're just as a way of kind of generating a bit of discussion afterwards. So the two things that I really want to speak about is using AI to boost your research. And, there's just a tidal wave of tools and applications coming out now, with this theme of AI and generative AI. And, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. How do you use AI to boost your research? Any tools you recommend? Maybe there's, ethical considerations here that we can discuss. Personally, I think the most powerful way to use some of these tools to boost research is as a tool for learning. I think that there's great opportunities to really help meet that challenge that Stephen mentioned of kind of keeping across the literature and, learning about different topics. So, one of the tools I came across was called supersymmetry. And, that's basically a way of, finding relevant research papers, but in a kind of a different way to how we might traditionally search for papers. Being able to find papers based on the meaning of a paper. It can be really useful to uncover rare papers and, papers that are kind of similar to that. So if you find a really relevant paper, it's a bit of a kind of a smarter way of finding papers that are similar to that. It also integrates with ChatGPT and can summarize papers for you in, non-scientific language to kind of help you with that task of reading. The other one then that I came across that I thought was really interesting is this tool called PDF Gear. Basically, you upload a PDF into it and it'll summarize it for you. But not only that, also you can chat with an AI bot about this paper. So if you've got questions, you can basically have a conversation. So it's almost like, having a really knowledgeable person that you can, have a journal club with almost, discussing papers. But it's, any PDF that you upload. And then also the third tool then that I thought was quite interesting, especially for those researchers who are writing grant applications at the moment, where you need to try and keep on top of who's citing your work. You mentioned, impact, Stephen. It can be really hard to know, like, what is the impact of your research, because oftentimes it takes years for impact to manifest. And you have to be able to kind of search for it. Anyway, one of the things that you can do is to figure out who is citing your work. And there's a tool here called Cite, which uses AI to basically analyze scientific articles. And it provides you the context of those citations, because not all citations are equal, I guess. People cite your work for various different reasons, and you want to know what are those reasons so you can kind of talk about them and integrate them into a bit of a story. Those are the kind of the tools that I wanted to share. Of course, there are many other ways that you can use AI in your research. Maybe it's around helping you brainstorm ideas. Maybe it's around helping you, come up with some ways of visually communicating your area of research. If you've got any kind of tips on any other ways that you could use AI, be great to discuss that. And then also, the ethical considerations of using AI, that I think we need to be aware of. I guess the big risk there is that you're potentially, you could potentially be creating work that you present as your own, but they're not necessarily ideas that you've come up with yourself, because it's been generated for you. And then the other thing that I often think about, and I often tell my students when I'm teaching them, because obviously students are very, tempted to use ChatGPT to write their assignments. And I feel like by doing that, maybe it's a quick win. You get an assignment written for you. But I think in the long term, you're doing yourself a disservice if you rely on generative AI to write for you. I really feel that, by writing, you're really exercising a muscle in your brain that's helping organize your thoughts and make your, improve the quality of your ideas. And, the big secret is when it comes to effective science communication, it's not about being naturally talented, having the gift of the gab. It's actually about the quality of your ideas. And it's about the structure in which you present those. And so writing for me is something that really helps align my thoughts and improves the quality of my ideas. So if you are relying on external tools to write for you, I really feel like you're doing a disservice. And I'd love if there was, I'm not sure if there are any studies on this, but I feel like you would be missing out on exercising that writing muscle, and the quality of your thoughts would suffer for it. Maybe that's something that we can discuss at the end. And I guess that kind of brings me to this point, of science isn't finished until it's communicated. I think our jobs as scientists are changing because of technology. It's not enough now just to do good research and publish exclusively. Maybe we can talk about that, whether you agree or not, but I believe it's not enough to just do good research and publish anymore. You have to be out there communicating your science to broad audiences. And we can start to see this with some of the systemic changes around funding guidelines, promotion guidelines, all recognizing the value of science communication more and more. So on that, then, you've kind of got this task of presenting your idea to, a variety of different audiences, and you're perhaps interacting with different technologies to do that. One of them being social media that you're all familiar with. Stephen, I was actually planning on saying the used to be publish or perish, but now, be visible or vanish. So I'm glad, that great minds think alike, right?
Maybe I stole that from you somewhere,
No, I haven't. I kept it a secret. I hadn't said it. I was gonna use it here, but I think it's something that's on a lot of people's minds at the moment, and I guess that just shows that it is on a lot of people's minds. And I think social media can be a bit of a double-edged blade. There's a really great book called How to Do Nothing: Resisting the Attention Economy. You know that a lot of these platforms are designed to grab your attention. And that can be a bit of a risk because, our time is really important. So I think it's about interacting with them in smart ways. Maybe we can discuss how do you strike that balance between, productive use of social media versus not. The way I see it is it's about adding value. So, when you're, interacting with social media, you want to try and add value. I think a lot of people use it. Maybe they just are on social media and they kind of see what other people are doing. But I think the best way is to, interact with people and add value. And I think they say, visibility without value is vanity. There's another quote for you. The next one then is kind of presenting on camera. And I think there are a couple of differences here with, regular presenting, where you might have to record a presentation for a conference or a job interview or whatever it is, where you're presenting on camera like I am now. It's really important to remember that you need to feed your audience with eye contact. So to do that, I need to look directly down the barrel of the camera like this. I might be tempted to look at where the faces appear on the screen. So Stephen, you know, I'm looking at you now, I'm looking at your face, but it doesn't feel to you like I'm giving you any eye contact. So you really need to make sure you look down the barrel of the camera. The other tip that I have about this is don't let perfection get in the way of excellence when you're recording yourself. What I mean by that is you're probably tempted to record like 100 times until it's perfect. But, you know, it's normal conversation. As part of normal conversation, you might have an or an ah or a pause or a stumble. And, you know, that's fine. So don't be tempted to do that. And the last tip I want to share is around kind of podcasting. If you are, you know, if you're either on a podcast as a guest or you're, you know, hosting a podcast, it's basically about a conversation between two people. And the thing that I've learned from hosting a podcast over the last couple of years is the skill of active listening. It's really important to practice active listening. And I guess this is relevant for just networking in general, right? The risk there is that someone is talking and you're not listening to what they're saying because you're thinking, what am I going to say next? And it's really important to listen carefully. If you've got some pre-planned questions, be ready to throw them out the door. Listen carefully to what the person is saying. And ask kind of follow-up questions about that, you know, following their passion, you know, what they seem to be really interested in. But yeah, it's really important to do active listening. So that is, and, you know, while speaking of podcasts, you know, the other thing to say here is that you might, if you're on a podcast, you know, or if you're presenting in general, there's nerves attached to that. Mark Twain said there are two types of speakers, those who get nervous and those who are liars. Maybe something that we can discuss is, how do you deal with nerves if you are presenting, you know, across some of these different types of platforms? And finally, then, shameless plug for the podcast that I host with Jen Martin. It's called Let's Talk SciComm. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for that. I'll hand back over to you, Stephen. I believe, Matthew, you're up next.
All right, I'll dive straight in. Nice one, Michael. I think that's a really good segue, and I'll kind of continue in that same fashion of presenting some really practical ideas, kind of focusing on a few things. So let me get my slides up. Okay, so again, I'll also talk for about 10 minutes or so. The three things that I'd like to talk about, given we've got a short amount of time. I'm going to first talk about the journey that our journal article goes on from its conception through to that endpoint. And Michael quite succinctly highlighted that it's not done until it's communicated. And I believe that too. But I'll talk about some practical steps along the way. And then I'm going to hone in on two things, similar to the way Michael honed in on AI there and presenting. I'm going to focus in on imagery and writing. So first up, I've got one slide on this, so bear with me. This is a roadmap that we produced, and it's for your journal article. Starts with, you know, that conception stage and pre-submission. You're writing your paper all the way through to the post-publication, and it's out there in the world. We produced this because we realized that there's many different options, and there's many more options not mapped on here. But it's to give people ideas of the timing and the right timing and the types of options that we have along the way. So whether we are going to get buy-in from our co-authors in terms of knowledge translation. So often we know how important that is to bring other people on the journey of knowledge translation with us. Then it might be about pitching to the conversation or pitching to local media. It really depends at what particular time point we're in. That is my alarm because it is it's now officially 6:30 a.m. here in Perth. Post-publication is around that the paper's out there and there's lots of things we can do at this stage. So I'm going to delve into the imagery ones and I'm going to then delve into the writing ones. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of other things. Something as small as just popping your ORC ID on a manuscript, that's part of knowledge translation. So imagery. We know we've heard the phrase before that a picture paints 1,000 words. I want to highlight that there's many different options when it comes to using imagery, using visuals and using graphics. So here, infographics, really important that these aren't just a repeat of the abstract. Less words, the better. They really help us to convey a key message and can be a route into reading a full manuscript or a full product. More recently, so these used across social media and are ever keeping on going, is photos, cartoons, memes. People that use them really well in the active transport world that I follow on social media. Brent Tadarian, a great account to follow. It is a great demonstration of how photos and cartoons and sometimes memes can be used to convey information. And yeah, I think going back to what Stephen was saying about those concepts of knowledge translation through to research impact and then into advocacy and active communication, I think they're all a science and an art of doing them. So it's partly a process and a methodology, and these are kind of what we're talking through today. But as you practice them over time, I think you do get better at them. And I really agree with Michael, is if you're diving into this in an early stage, maybe you're a PhD student getting into it for the first time, it can be good to just practice and have a go. You can lean out to other colleagues and get advice, but I think it's about having a go. That not all of your ideas are going to be brilliant, but practicing really, really helps. Another option, GIFs, moving images, graphical abstracts. So similar to an infographic, but specific to one particular article. And it's great to see that some journals are now starting to require things like this to help communicate a specific journal article. I wanted to talk briefly about a tool that I've kind of grown up with. It's born out of Sydney about 10, 15 years ago, Canva. Many of you might have heard of it. When I say I've grown up with it, it's because the first version was very limited and they have just continued to improve this platform. It is a graphic design tool, essentially, but it's online, very easy to use, and is a great place to practice some of these ideas. If that doesn't sound like you, though, if that doesn't sound like you in terms of graphic design or colors or that sort of thing, don't stress. There'll be somebody that is in your team or in a neighboring team, or somebody that you can employ either in the freelance kind of gig economy or in your team to do this sort of stuff. And that's where I wanted to introduce freelancer.com as another platform. Great little tool online. You can find freelancers that do all different types of work. Graphic design is the one that I've used it for, and image design. So the image in the bottom right corner there, we got developed through freelancer.com. You put in a budget, you get a load of submissions from different people around the world, and you choose your favorite and they get the contest prize. Fabulous tool, great way to meet people that have these sorts of skills as well. And you can dip in and out. Top tip for those that have grant funding that is ending up or coming towards the end and you need to acquit it, if you've got a spare 500 at the end of a grant, you can consider popping it into a platform like this for knowledge translation, and it will sit there and you can tap into it as and when needed. Okay, that was quite quick, but we'll do the writing section equally as quick because I really also want to get into that discussion section. And these like Michael and Stephen said, these are ideas. So let's talk about them. So writing, for me, this rather embarrassingly, when you're writing your applications to universities in England, you are encouraged, or we were encouraged, to put a quote into the opening line. I think it's probably gone away from that now, but this was the one I used. And I actually still think this one's really true for me. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so we do complex scientific writing, but being able to say that simply in short sentences and in language that people understand is a really important skill. So writing, I agree with Michael, is a process for the brain. So really important to do. So these are my top tips for writing for public-facing audiences. Short sentences, short paragraphs. Think about the reading age. So I was shocked to find that typically when you're pitching for newspaper audience, the reading age should be about 12 years old. So just bearing that in mind, that reading age is, when you're writing, really important. Finding the hook. So you might have heard the pyramid for academic articles, and it's the reverse pyramid for newspaper articles in terms of put your most important thing first and then come after. That's okay, but I think sometimes just finding the hook, and then the story can be non-pyramidal shaped. So just finding what is it that will get people interested, kind of like a soundbite, kind of like a grab that then gets them to read the rest of the article. And there's a balance there, of course, because you don't want them to just take the headline and run with it. What's the story? Don't just repeat abstracts. Don't just do the same story you've told in the paper, because that's not the story. When people say, what's the story? What's the story is, where does your paper sit in context? What does it mean for the world, rather than what does it mean for the academic world? At least that's how I come to understand it. Really important to choose what not to say and throw that out the window and choose what to focus on. Both Michael and I have had to do this for this presentation, in terms of there are many, many things that we could have presented on, but we've decided to focus on a few different things. Okay, last kind of few to get through, and then we'll get into some discussion. Another platform to introduce is Grow Kudos. Particularly good for people getting into knowledge translation or wanting to do more. It's a great place to practice as well, is what I'm trying to say. It's a platform to write plain language summaries. So you might have heard that, Tommy. Its audience is whoever you choose to send the link to. So you can put the link. This is an example of what the output looks like. And the audience is whoever you choose to send it to. So if you send it in an email to a decision maker in local government about a bicycle lane, and you've got a paper about it, you can tell whether that link's been opened. That's a really useful evaluation tool. I'll show you the back end here. So this is the back end of what it looks like. You draft your article there on the left. You talk about what it's all about and why it's important. You can add your own personal perspective as well. Then you start to get that feedback and evaluation as to how that plain language summary is going. So how many people have seen it? Has it influenced your altmetric score? These are all problematic metrics, so taking those with a pinch of salt. However, there is one that I think is really quite unique to Grow Kudos, and that's the email thing that I was talking about. So you can create different links. All of these here on the slide, they're all individual links, and it tracks them, and it shows you in the blue box here and the red one that I've circled how many people have opened it. So you know which of your messages have landed and which haven't. Of course, then there's policy briefs. People have heard of these. I'm not going to go into that one in too much detail. Same with social media. Perhaps something we can talk about in the discussion is around lurking and versus engaging. I'm a massive advocate for engaging, especially if you've been lurking for a while, because you now know the lay of the land. You know how it all works. The conversation, it's not a global tool, but it's getting there. There's more and more editions around the world. Fantastic avenue for getting your research in context, the story out there. And many people doing this now, so really good to see. Traditional newspapers, going the media release route and working with your communications departments at your universities. And I think building on from that is around building a rapport with journalists so that you have that ongoing routine next time you want to talk about a particular topic, be it public health or what have you. So finally, I just wanted to briefly end with a few of my key thoughts. This is my last slide, and then we'll perhaps hand back over to Stephen and we'll get into some discussion. Hopefully there's some questions coming through in the chat. I'll just take 1 minute to give you my thoughts about research dissemination. So firstly, I think we've got to enjoy it, and that's really key. So practicing and enjoying it. If it's something that we find difficult initially to enjoy, I think over time we can find ways that we can enjoy it. And I've certainly found that there's some avenues that I've struggled with and kind of practiced and got better at them, and you start to enjoy them. Dedicating time to it. So that's where it becomes that thing of, is this a role to produce the infographic for me, or do we actually need capacity? Do we need to bring in FTE, or do we need to use a platform like Freelancer to bring these things to life? Evaluation, really key. We're all about that in research, and I think just being mindful that sometimes the evaluation can be quite nuanced. I think the Grow Kudos example is a really clear example here. It's not just about alt metrics or number of clicks or citations. There's sometimes a really impactful thing could just be one person opening one email and knowing that they've read your plain language summary. That could be a really nice win. Build it into grants. So this is something that we can start to do now. Grants are starting to accept that knowledge translation, research impact, depending on what terminology the grant is using, can be built in. So building in line items for things like Grow Kudos, there's paid versions. For things like Freelancer and graphic design support, it's really is an important thing. I think PhD students should all be encouraged to practice it. I think it should be part of their what they're doing. I've finished with, if you have any access to media training, I think it can really help. And I try to go to as many as possible. If you've got access, try and go, because they can really illuminate some of the things we've been talking about today. So brilliant. I'll hand back over to Stephen, and hopefully we can have a bit of a chat.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Michael. Some wonderful insights there, some very useful resources I'll be checking out for myself, I think, some of those websites. That I like the Grow Kudos email link. I'd like to be good to integrate into work sometimes to see if who says they didn't get their emails. Huh? That would be quite an interesting one, I think. Okay, so Antonio, are you on by the XChange? Wondering, is any courses that people could attend to help with effective research communication? Anything you, Teppy or Michael, you've seen on the journeys, or?
Yeah, look, I don't know any kind of specific courses, but I do know that LinkedIn Learning is becoming a big thing now, and they run kind of short courses on all kinds of topics. And I know they do, research communication, and maybe some university libraries have a subscription to LinkedIn Learning if you're affiliated with a uni. And I'm also aware of Masterclass. They run courses with kind of, big figures in different areas. And I know Neil deGrasse Tyson does a course on science communication, but I believe that's paid. Be curious to hear if anyone's has any experience with LinkedIn Learning or Masterclass, but those are the two that come to mind.
Yeah, I like the LinkedIn Learning ones, Michael. That's something I've definitely got into, and there seems to be a lot more out there. I have seen more localized courses. I've seen, so for example, in Western Australia, Public Health Advocacy Institute, Western Australia, PHAIWA. We're great for acronyms, aren't we? They have a really great course, a week long, I have heard rumors that another organization with a very similar name to ISBN-PAR that focuses on physical activity, they are potentially looking into an advocacy course online. So there is that as well that may well be coming out soon. And I think that'd be a really useful tool as well.
And I popped a link in the chat. There's the Queensland government, they have dedicated a major resource into translating research into practice for allied health. And they have short videos on all the different components. It's links to frameworks that are good to use for translating research into practice. So, but it is written for allied health, but I think it's broadly applicable to any profession. And they have some good steps through resource. They've been doing it for quite a long time, so we lean on it pretty heavily here for some of ours. Another question is, do we know how to reach out to other cultures and places to help with our research communication? So moving outside of maybe the direct scope of where it works, and how we can sort of try and explain how this research will be applicable in other cultures. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I can share some just brief thoughts. First of all, I think this is really, really important. There is, when it comes to communication, there is absolutely a cultural lens to that people of different cultures communicate in, slightly different ways. And I think oftentimes, it's very easy to kind of get caught up in a bit of a bubble of, people that you interact with regularly. And, effective communication is all about being able to put yourself in the shoes of the audience. And so with that kind of goal in mind, I think it's really important to try and speak to people with different backgrounds and cultural experience, to try and understand, how, their perspectives, so that you can, better, communicate. So yeah, I guess just a brief comment on, I think that's really important. How do you do that? I think it's about trying to, active listening, understanding how, how these, how different people have different perspectives on different topics, and being willing to kind of, be flexible in terms of how you, how you communicate to different groups of people.
It sounds like having that two-way interaction rather than a didactic, this is what we've done.
Yeah, that really good point. Yeah, like communications, it's a two-way flow of information. It's not, me telling you about something. It's actually should be a conversation.
Yeah, I think that's particularly true when the context can be quite different, right? Yeah, two-way.
So personal analogy, I remember publishing my first paper as a PhD student, all graft and many rejections. And I thought, wow, how good. And then it just sort of blipped into the ocean and, no ripples. So our great supervision team, but none of them had social media presence. There was never discussion around doing any of the stuff you talked about, Tepi, any of the local engagement, reaching out there. So as a student, I sort of thought, is this it? All that graft for, you just drop it out there and hope someone picks it up. So for, PhD students or even early career researchers who work with, who work in teams where some of the people don't, maybe for whatever reason, their team members aren't so engaged in dissemination, any strategies that people could use to try and get their team on board?
Oh, really good question. There's
and I might even be able to use it myself,
There's sticklers out there, right? Yeah, they it's like the classic, if you're going to put your time into that, what you're going to get out of it, and if you can't see the direct impact, then don't do it. I think with knowledge translation, because it is messy, like the timing, what do you get out, sometimes doesn't stack up, sometimes is like massively in your favor. So I think trying to frame it like that, I think particularly for PhD students, I think framing it as part of skill building and wanting to learn how to do it, rather than saying it's because I want to talk about this one particular paper, but framing it as I want to learn a skill set around science communication, because that's more and more important these days. Even people that don't like science communication know that science communication is getting bigger and bigger, and part of job applications and that sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had one more thing, which was a really good avenue for if they then say no, still not interested. I think a really good avenue for people is then to join societies like ISBN-PAR, like ISPAR, and particularly their early career networks. I think if you're a PhD student, that can be a great way to practice some of those skills with other people like-minded that also want to practice and get better at doing them. So yeah, that's what I do. Like join different early and still learning out different things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, I can definitely see, tangible benefits to setting aside time away from other tasks to do science communication. But I think the challenge is all of the benefits of doing that, they're not necessarily clear or tangible, that it's almost like, the benefits, it's kind of similar to networking, right? That you never know, what opportunities it might lead to in the future. So, if your work is more visible, you never know who is going to be, reading that. It might be someone who's on a promotions panel, or it might be a future employer or a future collaborator who's aware of your work. Great example is that at Melbourne Uni, there's a researcher called Andy Pask who sets aside a lot of time to do communication, and he was recently gifted $15 million from philanthropic sources, basically because every time they Googled anything related to the Tasmanian tiger, which is an interest of his, his name popped up. So that's an extreme example of, you never know who's in the audience. But I think our brains are not hardwired for exponential thinking. So it's hard to see some of those kind of longer term benefits. We often underestimate what benefits or outcomes could be achieved over the long term if we engage in science communication.
And Michael, I'm wary of anybody adding more tasks to their already list of things to do, but in the essence of shameless self-promotion and keeping your name up there, and maybe if you've got good search engine optimization, what do you think about, and Tepi, the role of having your own blog? Do you think it seemed to be, for a while when blogs came a thing, everyone was jumping on, but I know they're time intensive to manage.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a lot of different ways you can engage in science communication, and you don't necessarily have to do it all. And I actually think it's better to, rather than seeking out novel ways of communicating all the time, I think it's really important to, maybe rather than focus on novelty, focus on nuance. So maybe pick a few kind of key things that you want to put time into, and maybe for you that might be blogging, and maybe it means that you kind of actively manage a blog rather than kind of having a presence on 10 different platforms. I think it's better to replace novelty with nuance. I think blogging is great because you're really practicing that writing muscle, and you're going to be really clarifying your ideas, but it is time intensive, and it probably means you can't do a whole load of other science communication related activities, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think it's a good point, because you sometimes end up in a blog and it looks like it's been tended for a while and then dropped off, and maybe people don't have the ability to do it all and try go for too much. Anton, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was
comment?
thinking, it's a comment about, so both of you, Tepi and Michael, you have some, the podcasts and you do a lot of stuff. And I'm wondering, because communication, as you mentioned, is a two-way thing, how do you deal with after the podcast is published with people coming in and making comments? Do you spend a lot of time on that? Or?
Yeah, look, I think it's a bit more challenging to evaluate the effectiveness of a piece of communication that you've done kind of after the fact, but I think it's really important, you know, because you can learn a lot through self-reflection. I think it's just about trying to seek feedback and, you know, asking people if you've got an audience, you know, if you've got a comment section in the blogs, you know, maybe you have a sentence kind of specifically at the end where you're kind of inviting discussion or asking friends or colleagues. But it really comes down to, seeking feedback so that you can evaluate, you know, is my message landing, and, you know, readjust for next time.
Yeah, getting that feedback all the time. It, you know, say like a conversation article and you get the comments down below. They're massively useful because it helps you to understand whether some of the messages have landed. Some of the things that you were trying to say haven't been either. Yeah, haven't been that. There's not been that two-way understanding the way I was trying to get it across. So I think that's really, really useful to reflect on what people are saying. And I think it's happening all of the time. We do it naturally anyway. So maybe taking that little bit of a thought about, okay, well, it's actually really quite important that I do read these because it's good to know what people are thinking about it. Personally, I just going back to the blog thing. I think it's really important. We've presented today on so many different tools, and I don't think either Michael or I are saying go and do all of these. It's just about picking at the right time on that journey, whether it's the journey of a journal article or the journey of a research group, or your research, choosing which ones are the right timing and also sticking with some of them and building on them. So and you find out which ones you then enjoy. I think it comes back to, because it steals time, and that's what Stephen was saying, because it steals time, enjoying it's quite important. And finding which ones you can enjoy.
There's only so much time, isn't there? And in the spirit of time, we have 3 minutes to go. There's nothing else in the chat. So if anybody has a last minute question they want to dash in, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I always get asked the question, maybe if somebody comes in, I'll stop talking, but I always get asked the question around the politics of advocacy and the role of scientists in that advocacy and politics of where do we sit? Where do people feel comfortable sitting? Seems to be on a massive broad spectrum. But wherever people do sit, I think everybody does have a role in things like advocacy, even if you're a little bit more conservative. And I think that's okay, as long as you can be feeding information along that knowledge translation pipeline to other people so that they've got your information and they can use it. You know, you might be more happy with a policy brief than a conversation article, for example. But that policy brief might end up getting cited in the conversation article. So that'd be my one. It's my stock answer for that type of question. I don't know what you guys think about politics of it.
You know, Tepi, I was thinking of asking you something about advocacy and lobbyists and stuff, but I thought in 4 minutes when I was thinking about it, we might not get it through.
Yeah, I think it doesn't everyone sit, like if you're a researcher, doesn't every researcher sit on the spectrum? Because doesn't advocacy start with generating evidence? That's the beginning of it. And so if you're a researcher, you're involved in the business of generating evidence. And then you kind of have opportunities then to kind of take that evidence forward, and advocate, you know, based on whatever your research area is. But everyone's involved in at least step one.
Yeah. And I know we had, we ran at the ISPNPA conference, we ran a workshop for the early career researchers on science communication. And one of our speakers talked about what's impact. And for them, impact was saying, I meet with the physical activity policy and health manager once every month to talk about getting research into action. So that's impact. It's, I have a calendar meeting every month with this person who has policy oversight. So it's using your social status as a researcher to get you those meetings with people who have leverage over policy, and you can sort of try and influence that way. So yeah, I think we're all on the spectrum of influence somewhere. Michael, we just find out where we sit, maybe Teppy, and try and influence at some points.
Yeah, and I think that relates to career stage as well. So people shouldn't be put off if they're a PhD student. They can be feeding into their supervisor's meeting that they're about to have with a policy person, and so working together in a team. So the people that have that more time might be producing some of the products, but then the conversations are happening at the higher level, and there's an interaction there. But just that's really important too. Everybody's connected in this.
We all have a role to play. Okay, so conscious of time and closing ceremonies to go. So thank you, Teppy. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Antonio, for allowing us to run this. Check out Teppy and Michael on their social media profiles, and check out Michael's podcast on science communication. Thank you, everyone, for showing up, and enjoy the rest of the